The origins of the Mitsubishi A6M can be traced to Japan's rapid military expansion and naval modernization in the late 1930s, as the Imperial Japanese Navy sought an aircraft capable of ensuring aerial supremacy across the vast expanses of the Pacific. At the time, Japan's most advanced carrier fighter, the Mitsubishi A5M, was already showing its limitations in range, speed, and firepower, especially as tensions grew with Western powers. Recognizing the need for a next-generation fighter that could outperform any potential adversary, the Navy issued a demanding specification in 1937. The requirements called for a carrier-based aircraft capable of reaching 500 kilometers per hour, climbing to 3,000 meters in under 3.5 minutes, carrying two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns, and possessing a range exceeding 1,850 kilometers, a range far beyond anything Western fighters of the time could achieve. Mitsubishi, led by chief designer Jiro Horikoshi, took on the challenge, creating a design that prioritized agility and range above all else. Horikoshi's team utilized lightweight construction techniques, relying heavily on the new extra duralumin alloys, which offered strength comparable to conventional metals while significantly reducing weight. Every element of the aircraft was optimized for minimal mass. Armor protection for the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks were deliberately omitted to keep the airframe light, while the wings and fuselage were aerodynamically refined to minimize drag. The resulting design would allow the Zero to achieve unparalleled maneuverability and exceptional range, giving it the ability to engage opponents on Japan's terms in the wide theaters of the Pacific. Power came from the Nakajima Sakai radial engine, selected for its balance of reliability, power, and relatively low weight. Though producing less horsepower than some contemporary Western engines, its efficiency and integration with the Zero's lightweight frame enabled the aircraft to meet the Navy's demanding performance criteria. The airframe featured a low-mounted elliptical wing with a long span, enhancing lift at low speeds and improving turning ability, traits critical for dogfighting. The design also incorporated a streamlined canopy and retractable landing gear, features that, while becoming standard globally, underscored the Zero's modernity compared to older carrier fighters. The design process was not without challenges. Meeting the Navy's stringent range requirement forced Horikoshi's team to maximize internal fuel capacity, pushing structural tolerances and necessitating weight savings that left the aircraft vulnerable in sustained combat. The lack of armor and self-sealing tanks would later become a liability, but in the late 1930s, the emphasis was squarely on offensive reach and agility, in keeping with Japan's strategy of striking quickly and decisively. By 1939, the prototype A6M was nearing completion, promising an aircraft that not only met, but surpassed its original specifications. At a time when Western carrier fighters like the Grumman F-3F biplane and Brewster Buffalo lagged far behind in speed, climb, and range, the Zero represented a new paradigm. A long-range, highly maneuverable naval fighter capable of projecting Japanese air power across the Pacific. Its first flights and subsequent tests would reveal just how far ahead Horikoshi's design had leapt, setting the stage for the Zero to dominate the early years of the coming conflict. The prototype of the A6M, designated A6M1, completed its maiden flight on April 1, 1939 at Kagamigahara Airfield, piloted by Mitsubishi test pilot Katsuzo Shima. Early testing immediately confirmed the revolutionary nature of Jiro Horikoshi's design. The aircraft demonstrated speeds exceeding 480 kilometers per hour, a climb rate superior to most land-based fighters, and a turn radius unmatched by any operational aircraft of the period. Its ability to sustain flight ranges of more than 2,000 kilometers with auxiliary fuel tanks validated the Navy's ambitious specification, enabling it to escort bombers or conduct independent strikes over the vast Pacific without reliance on forward bases. Test pilots noted its superb handling characteristics, particularly its responsiveness in low-speed maneuvers and dogfights, traits ideal for carrier operations and the tactics favored by Japanese naval aviators. Despite these successes, the prototype revealed certain areas for refinement before entering production. The initial A6M1 was powered by a 780 horsepower Mitsubishi Zuisei 13 engine, which, while efficient, left the airframe slightly underpowered during steep climbs and at higher altitudes. To address this, the production model adopted the more powerful Nakajima Sakai 12 radial engine, delivering 940 horsepower, which improved climb performance and top speed without significantly affecting the aircraft's weight or range. Flight trials also prompted adjustments to the landing gear and tailwheel assemblies to improve reliability during carrier operations, as well as refinements to the canopy for better pilot visibility during combat. Armament testing confirmed the Zero's balance between firepower and agility. Its two 20mm Type 99 cannons mounted in the wings provided a destructive advantage over the rifle-caliber machine guns used by many contemporary fighters, while its twin 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns in the cowl offered supplementary forward fire. Engineers ensured that the weight of the heavier cannons did not compromise the aircraft's delicate balance by carefully redistributing structural reinforcement along the wings. The transition from prototype to production was expedited by the Japanese Navy's recognition of the Zero's superiority over existing carrier fighters. By mid-1940, production of the A6M2 Model 11 had begun, incorporating the improved Sakai engine, a folding wingtip modification to facilitate carrier storage, and slight structural reinforcements to withstand the rigors of operational use. The first operational units began receiving the aircraft in July 1940, with the Tainan Air Group among the earliest to deploy the Zero for combat trials over China. Initial combat evaluations in the skies over Chongqing and Chengdu quickly validated the aircraft's reputation. The Zero easily outperformed the Soviet-supplied I-16s and I-153s flown by Chinese forces, achieving overwhelming kill ratios and demonstrating the value of its long range, high maneuverability, and powerful armament. These early encounters not only confirmed the Zero as a formidable weapon, but also gave Japanese naval aviators the confidence to expand offensive operations, knowing their new fighter could dominate opponents across vast stretches of contested airspace. By late 1940, with production accelerating and operational feedback refining minor aspects of the design, the Zero was poised to enter the broader conflict. Its performance during prototype trials and initial combat deployments convinced both Japanese commanders and foreign observers that the A6M represented a paradigm shift in naval aviation, a carrier fighter capable of matching or surpassing land-based adversaries and projecting Japanese air power farther than ever before. The A6M Zero entered full operational service with the Imperial Japanese Navy in mid-1940, first seeing combat with elite units such as the Tainan Air Group during the ongoing conflict in China. Its debut marked an immediate and decisive shift in regional air superiority. Engaging Soviet-built Polikarpov I-16 and I-153 fighters used by Chinese forces, the Zero demonstrated overwhelming dominance, achieving kill ratios that sometimes exceeded 10-1. Its unmatched maneuverability, extended combat radius, and heavier armament allowed Japanese pilots to dictate the terms of engagement, often striking targets and returning to base without the need for forward airfields. These early operations solidified the aircraft's reputation among Japanese aviators as a fighter without peer, and reports of its performance began to circulate among foreign military observers, prompting growing concern in Western intelligence circles. By late 1941, the Zero had become the principal carrier fighter of the Imperial Japanese Navy, replacing the older A5M and equipping the carrier air groups that would spearhead Japan's opening offensives in the Pacific. Its long range allowed it to escort bombers and conduct independent patrols far beyond the capability of most Allied fighters. When Japan launched its attacks across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, including the raids on Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and Malaya, the Zero formed the backbone of the offensive air units. Pilots found the aircraft exceptionally responsive and forgiving in dogfights, able to outturn virtually every Allied opponent at the time, including the Brewster Buffalo, Curtiss P-40, and Hawker Hurricane, all of which struggled to match its agility. Operational integration revealed both the Zero's strengths and its inherent trade-offs. Pilots quickly came to appreciate its ability to engage enemies at long ranges and in prolonged engagements, traits critical for Japan's strategy of rapid, far-reaching strikes. However, commanders and aircrew alike noted the absence of self-sealing fuel tanks and pilot armor, vulnerabilities that, while acceptable during the early months of dominance, left the aircraft dangerously prone to catastrophic damage once opponents developed tactics to exploit its fragility. Despite these risks, the Zero's early service record reinforced Japan's confidence in its offensive doctrine, enabling carrier task forces to operate deep in enemy waters with effective air cover. Reactions from pilots and commanders during these first operational months were overwhelmingly positive. Veteran Japanese aviators praised its harmony of speed, range, and maneuverability, while even cautious officers acknowledged its ability to exceed the capabilities of nearly all known adversaries. The Zero's success in China and during the initial Pacific campaigns established it as the symbol of Japanese air power, fostering a belief that it could continue to dominate as the war expanded. Its early combat role would soon extend beyond these initial offensives, as the Zero became the centerpiece of Japan's efforts to hold its rapidly growing empire, facing increasingly capable Allied opposition as the conflict progressed. The Zero's combat role expanded dramatically in 1942 as it became the cornerstone of Japan's efforts to secure and defend its rapidly expanding Pacific Empire. From the Coral Sea to Midway and throughout the Solomons campaign, the A6M served as the primary fighter for both carrier and land-based operations, escorting bombers, engaging Allied fighters, and protecting Japanese fleets and bases. In the early stages of these campaigns, it continued to achieve aerial superiority, outmaneuvering American aircraft like the F-4F Wildcat and P-40 Warhawk, while its long range allowed it to strike far beyond the operational reach of most Allied fighters. Its combination of speed, agility, and endurance allowed Japanese forces to project power across vast distances, making the Zero the defining instrument of Japan's air strategy. However, sustained combat in 1942 began to reveal the vulnerabilities inherent in the Zero's design philosophy. Its lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks made it highly susceptible to damage when caught in concentrated defensive fire or head-on engagements. Allied pilots, initially at a severe disadvantage, began developing counter-tactics to offset the Zero's agility. The boom and zoom method, favoring diving attacks followed by rapid climbs, exploited the Zero's relatively slow roll rate and limited ability to recover energy at high speeds. Coordinated teamwork and slashing attacks allowed Allied pilots to reduce losses, even while still flying less capable aircraft like the Wildcat. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 marked a turning point not only for Japan's strategic fortunes, but for the Zero's operational context. While the aircraft continued to perform effectively, the heavy losses suffered by Japan's carrier air groups depleted the experienced pilots who had made the Zero so lethal. Replacement pilots, less skilled and trained under compressed programs, struggled to match the combat effectiveness of their predecessors, diminishing the Zero's edge even as it remained technically formidable. As the Guadalcanal campaign unfolded later that year, the Zero faced prolonged attritional battles that tested both its durability and the endurance of Japan's air arm. Although still superior in maneuverability, it increasingly encountered coordinated Allied tactics and improving aircraft, including later variants of the F-4F Wildcat and early P-38 Lightnings. Prolonged engagements over the Solomon Islands highlighted the Zero's difficulty sustaining combat effectiveness in the face of better armored foes and mounting logistical strains, as Japan's ability to replace losses lagged behind the Allies' industrial capacity. Despite these growing challenges, the Zero remained central to Japan's defensive and offensive operations throughout 1942, flying escort missions, fleet defense sorties, and ground attack strikes. Its battlefield role evolved from being purely a tool of air dominance to one of attritional defense, forced to absorb mounting Allied pressure while Japan sought to consolidate its territorial gains. Though its early dominance had begun to erode, the A6M continued to embody Japan's offensive reach, even as its design limitations and the shifting balance of pilot skill and production capacity began to undermine the supremacy it had once enjoyed. By 1943, the A6M-0 was forced into a period of rapid adaptation as the tide of the air war shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. New American aircraft such as the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, both faster, more heavily armed, and far more rugged, began entering service in large numbers. These fighters, combined with improved Allied tactics, neutralized many of the Zero's once overwhelming advantages. To counter these developments, Japanese engineers introduced successive upgrades to the Zero, including the A6M3 Model 32 and later A6M5 variants, which featured a shortened, clipped wing for improved roll rate, thicker wing skin to allow higher diving speeds, and more powerful versions of the Nakajima Sakai engine. These modifications improved certain performance aspects but could not overcome the limitations of the lightweight airframe or the absence of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. In the field, the Zero's role evolved as Japanese forces transitioned from an offensive to a defensive strategy. Once the spearhead of carrier task force strikes, the aircraft was increasingly used to defend island bases, intercept American bombers, and support ground operations as Japan's territorial perimeter contracted. While the upgraded Zero variants could still hold their own in skilled hands, attrition among veteran pilots left many aircraft flown by inexperienced replacements who lacked the training to exploit its agility or avoid its vulnerabilities. As a result, even with performance refinements, the Zero suffered mounting losses, particularly against mass formations of Hellcats and Corsairs supported by radar-coordinated vectoring and numerical superiority. Specialized versions of the Zero were also introduced to diversify its capabilities. Reconnaissance-configured Zeros carried cameras in place of some armament, providing valuable intelligence as Japan's ability to monitor Allied movements diminished. Trainer versions were stripped of armament and optimized for preparing new pilots, though these efforts struggled to keep pace with the attrition rate among frontline units. Late-war A6M7 models were adapted for ground attack and suicide missions, equipped to carry bombs and endure the stresses of dive bombing, as the aircraft was increasingly employed in roles far removed from its original conception as a nimble dogfighter. The Zero's adaptation was further constrained by Japan's industrial and resource limitations. While the Allies were introducing entirely new fighter designs and rapidly improving engines, Japanese industry was forced to work within the confines of the existing airframe, lacking the capacity to mass-produce more advanced successors in meaningful numbers. Attempts to replace the Zero with aircraft like the Mitsubishi J2M Raiden or Kawanishi N1KJ were too slow and limited to offset the overwhelming Allied advantage. By the end of 1943, the Zero, though still present in large numbers, had lost the qualitative edge it once held. It remained the most numerous and widely deployed fighter in the Imperial Japanese Navy, but its battlefield role had shifted from the undisputed ruler of the Pacific skies to a workhorse increasingly tasked with holding back Allied offensives under increasingly desperate conditions. Its ongoing upgrades could delay but not reverse the strategic and technological momentum now firmly in Allied hands. By 1944 and 1945, the A6M0 had transitioned from Japan's symbol of aerial dominance to a platform increasingly forced into desperate and unconventional roles as the Empire's fortunes collapsed. The introduction of the A6M5C and A6M7 variants, incorporating additional armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and structural reinforcements for dive bombing and bomber interception, addressed some of the aircraft's long-standing vulnerabilities. However, these changes added weight, reducing the Zero's agility and climb rate, the very traits that had defined its early supremacy. Against Allied fighters like the Hellcat, Corsair, P-38 Lightning, and the ever-present P-51 Mustang, the Zero was now thoroughly outclassed in speed, firepower, and survivability. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific, the Zero's missions became increasingly defensive and sacrificial. With Japan's carrier force largely destroyed and fuel supplies dwindling, many Zeros operated from isolated island bases, engaging in interception missions against overwhelming odds. By late 1944, following the catastrophic losses of the Philippine campaign, the Zero became a principal aircraft used in kamikaze operations, particularly the A6M7 and adapted A6M5 models. Stripped of non-essential equipment and loaded with explosives or bombs, these aircraft were directed against Allied naval task forces during battles such as Leyte Gulf and Okinawa, where mass suicide attacks inflicted damage but at an unsustainable cost in aircraft and pilots. Even outside kamikaze roles, Zeros served as ground attack aircraft, night fighters in limited numbers, and trainers as Japan attempted to sustain its shrinking pilot corps. However, shortages of experienced aviators, declining industrial capacity, and the Allies' relentless air and naval superiority rendered these efforts largely symbolic. The aircraft's once revolutionary range was less relevant in the defensive context, as engagements were now fought closer to Japanese territory, where fuel scarcity further curtailed operational flexibility. Despite its obsolescence, the Zero remained the most numerous fighter in Japanese service until the war's end, primarily because there was no viable replacement that could be produced in sufficient numbers. More advanced Japanese fighters, such as the Kawanishi N1KJ and Mitsubishi J2M, were built in limited quantities and could not offset the losses or replace the Zero as Japan's mainstay aircraft. The reliance on the A6M, even in roles for which it was ill-suited, reflected both Japan's dwindling industrial output and its strategic desperation in the war's final years. By August 1945, the Zero had become a shadow of the weapon that once dominated the Pacific skies. While still capable of inflicting losses through suicide attacks and occasional successful interceptions, it no longer held any meaningful parity with Allied aircraft. Instead, its final chapter was defined by its role as a symbol of Japan's tenacity and desperation, embodying both the ingenuity that had once made it a fearsome fighter and the harsh realities of a nation fighting a losing battle against a materially and technologically superior enemy. After Japan's surrender in 1945, the A6M-Zero's operational career effectively ended, yet its influence and legacy continued well into the post-war period. Most surviving aircraft were scrapped as part of Allied disarmament efforts, with only a fraction preserved for evaluation, display, or research. Captured Zeros were studied extensively by the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, providing valuable data on Japanese aeronautical engineering, lightweight construction methods, and combat performance characteristics. The flight tests conducted on recovered aircraft, particularly the evaluation of the Model 21-0 at NAS Anacostia and Wright Field, offered the Allies insights into its strengths, exceptional range and maneuverability, and its critical weaknesses, including structural fragility and lack of protection, lessons that inform both post-war training and future aircraft design. Although quickly rendered obsolete by jet fighters, the Zero found limited secondary roles in the immediate post-war years. A handful were flown by Allied forces for liaison, training, or demonstration purposes, while others were used as instructional airframes in technical schools across Asia and the Pacific. Some surviving Zeros were sold or transferred to emerging air arms in Asia, such as China's nationalist forces, but these were used sparingly, mainly for training or static display, given the lack of spare parts and the rapid advent of jet-powered aircraft. Culturally and historically, the Zero became an enduring symbol of Japan's wartime aviation achievements and the contradictions of its design philosophy. In Japan, it was both a point of national pride for its early wartime performance and a somber reminder of the desperation that saw it employed in kamikaze missions. In the West, the Zero's early dominance prompted respect and caution, shaping the development of new tactics and technologies that would define the latter stages of the Pacific War. In the decades following the conflict, the Zero gained new life as a centerpiece of museums, documentaries, and air shows, representing both the technological leap it embodied and the historical era it defined. Restoration projects, often combining salvaged parts from multiple airframes, brought a small number of Zeros back to airworthy condition, where they continue to fly at commemorative events, their distinctive silhouette and engine sound offering living connections to the Pacific Air War. The aircraft's enduring presence in historical narratives reflects its dual identity as both a technological milestone and a cautionary example of design priorities that, while effective early in the war, proved unsustainable against evolving threats. Today, preserved Zeros serve not only as artifacts of Japanese engineering, but as reminders of the shifting nature of air combat, from a focus on extreme agility and range to the balanced survivability and firepower that came to dominate aircraft design in the post-war jet era. Its legacy remains integral to understanding both the rise and the ultimate decline of Japan's wartime air power. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero's legacy endures as both a symbol of Japan's early wartime dominance and a case study in how rapid technological and strategic shifts can transform a revolutionary design into an obsolete platform within just a few years. Over 10,000 Zeros were built between 1940 and 1945, making it Japan's most produced fighter and the backbone of the Imperial Navy's air arm throughout the war. Its extraordinary range, agility, and firepower in its early iterations redefined naval aviation by allowing Japan to project fighter cover over unprecedented distances, a capability unmatched by Western aircraft when the Pacific conflict began. These traits enabled Japan's initial string of victories, from the attack on Pearl Harbor to the rapid conquest of Southeast Asia, giving the Zero a reputation as the premier fighter of its era. Yet, the same design priorities that fueled the Zero's early success extreme weight savings, lack of protective armor, and reliance on agility over speed or durability ultimately doomed it as Allied technology and tactics advanced. The arrival of robust, heavily armed fighters like the Hellcat, Corsair, and Mustang, combined with improved Allied pilot training and radar coordination, rendered the Zero's strengths insufficient by 1943. Attempts to adapt the airframe with more armor, reinforced wings, and stronger engines provided incremental improvements, but also eroded its agility, leaving it trapped between its original concept and the evolving demands of modern air combat. Despite its decline as a frontline fighter, the Zero's influence on aviation and military thought was significant. Its performance shocked Western observers, prompting the United States and Britain to accelerate the development of higher-performing carrier-based aircraft, adopt energy tactics over traditional dogfighting, and prioritize durability alongside maneuverability. The lessons learned from combating the Zero informed the next generation of fighters, which combined range and performance with survivability, a philosophy that became standard in post-war aviation. Today, the Zero stands as one of the most recognizable aircraft of the Second World War, preserved in museums and flown at air shows as a reminder of both its innovation and the shifting dynamics of aerial warfare. Restored examples, often pieced together from multiple wrecks recovered from Pacific battlefields, serve as living exhibits of its engineering and the era it represents. In historical narratives, the Zero is remembered not only as the fighter that ruled the Pacific during the conflict's opening years, but also as a cautionary tale about the perils of over-specialization in aircraft design. Ultimately, the A6M Zero's legacy reflects the duality of technological advancement in wartime. A machine that began as an unmatched instrument of power projection, but within 5 years was outpaced by the accelerating curve of military innovation. Its story illustrates how an aircraft can dominate, adapt, and decline in rapid succession, while still leaving a lasting imprint on aviation history and the cultural memory of the Second World War. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero's legacy endures as both a symbol of Japan's early wartime dominance and a case study in how rapid technological and strategic shifts can transform a revolutionary design into an obsolete platform within just a few years. Over 10,000 Zeros were built between 1940 and 1945, making it Japan's most produced fighter and the backbone of the Imperial Navy's air arm throughout the war. Its extraordinary range, agility, and firepower in its early iterations redefined naval aviation by allowing Japan to project fighter cover over unprecedented distances, a capability unmatched by Western aircraft when the Pacific conflict began. These traits enabled Japan's initial string of victories, from the attack on Pearl Harbor to the rapid conquest of Southeast Asia, giving the Zero a reputation as the premier fighter of its era. Yet, the same design priorities that fueled the Zero's early success, extreme weight savings, lack of protective armor, and reliance on agility over speed or durability, ultimately doomed it as Allied technology and tactics advanced. The arrival of robust, heavily armed fighters like the Hellcat, Corsair, and Mustang, combined with improved Allied pilot training and radar coordination, rendered the Zero's strengths insufficient by 1943. Attempts to adapt the airframe with more armor, reinforced wings, and stronger engines provided incremental improvements, but also eroded its agility, leaving it trapped between its original concept and the evolving demands of modern air combat. Despite its decline as a frontline fighter, the Zero's influence on aviation and military thought was significant. Its performance shocked Western observers, prompting the United States and Britain to accelerate the development of higher-performing carrier-based aircraft, adopt energy tactics over traditional dogfighting, and prioritize durability alongside maneuverability. The lessons learned from combating the Zero informed the next generation of fighters, which combined range and performance with survivability, a philosophy that became standard in post-war aviation. Today, the Zero stands as one of the most recognizable aircraft of the Second World War, preserved in museums and flown at air shows as a reminder of both its innovation and the shifting dynamics of aerial warfare. Restored examples, often pieced together from multiple wrecks recovered from Pacific battlefields, serve as living exhibits of its engineering and the era it represents. In historical narratives, the Zero is remembered not only as the fighter that ruled the Pacific during the conflict's opening years, but also as a cautionary tale about the perils of over-specialization in aircraft design. Ultimately, the A6M0's legacy reflects the duality of technological advancement in wartime. A machine that began as an unmatched instrument of power projection, but within 5 years was outpaced by the accelerating curve of military innovation. Its story illustrates how an aircraft can dominate, adapt, and decline in rapid succession, while still leaving a lasting imprint on aviation history and the cultural memory of the Second World War. After the war, the A6M0's operational relevance disappeared almost overnight, but its airframe and the lessons it embodied continued to influence aviation in multiple ways. Most surviving Zeros were quickly scrapped by the Allies as part of the broader dismantling of Japan's military infrastructure, but dozens were captured intact for testing. American, British, and Soviet engineers examined these aircraft extensively, evaluating their aerodynamic efficiency, lightweight construction, and performance traits. Flight tests at facilities such as Wright Field in the United States provided valuable insights into how the Zero achieved its agility and range, informing Western design and tactical development even as jet propulsion became the dominant focus of military aviation. A handful of Zeros found short-lived post-war service, largely in secondary or symbolic roles. Some were used by Allied forces as trainers, demonstration aircraft, or technical teaching aids for aviation schools in the Pacific and Asia. In China, a few captured examples were flown briefly by nationalist forces before being grounded due to a lack of spare parts and the rapid obsolescence of piston engine fighters. By the early 1950s, almost all surviving operational Zeros had been retired, leaving only a scattering of derelict airframes in storage or forgotten on remote islands where they had crashed or been abandoned. While its functional life was brief, the Zero became a prominent subject of historical interest and preservation efforts as the post-war decades unfolded. Aviation enthusiasts and museums sought to recover and restore surviving airframes, often salvaging wrecks from Pacific Islands or combining parts from multiple aircraft to create complete examples. These efforts, though challenging due to the scarcity of original components, eventually returned several Zeros to airworthy condition, allowing them to participate in air shows and commemorative events. Their distinctive silhouette and sound became enduring features of World War II reenactments and historical demonstrations, keeping the aircraft alive as a tangible link to the Pacific conflict. Beyond preservation, the Zero's design philosophy left an imprint on the evolution of aerial combat doctrine. Western air forces studied its reliance on agility and range at the cost of protection, reinforcing the shift toward aircraft that balance speed, firepower, and survivability rather than focusing exclusively on maneuverability. These lessons, though drawn from a soon obsolete piston engine fighter, influenced the early jet age by underscoring the dangers of over-specialization and the importance of designing adaptable platforms capable of meeting changing threats. By the late 20th century, the Zero had transitioned fully into the realm of cultural and historical memory. With only a few restored examples flying worldwide and dozens more displayed in museums, it became less a relic of Japanese militarism and more a symbol of the rapid technological innovation and shifting fortunes of the Second World War. Its continued presence in films, documentaries, and public exhibitions reflects both its iconic status and the enduring fascination with the fighter that once dominated the Pacific skies, but ultimately became a lesson in the fleeting nature of technological advantage in wartime. The Mitsubishi A6M0's legacy endures as both a pinnacle of early war aeronautical achievement and a stark reminder of how quickly technological progress can shift the balance in combat aviation. Between 1940 and 1945, it served as the Imperial Japanese Navy's most prolific and influential fighter, with over 10,000 built, shaping the outcome of nearly every major battle in the Pacific during the first half of the war. Its unmatched range, maneuverability, and firepower allowed Japan to seize air superiority across vast oceanic distances, projecting power from carriers and remote island bases in ways Western militaries had not yet matched. These strengths enabled the rapid expansion of Japan's empire and gave the Zero a near-mythical reputation as the embodiment of Japanese air power. Yet the same design philosophy that gave the Zero its early dominance, extreme weight reduction, lack of armor, and reliance on agility, ensured its vulnerability as the war advanced. By 1943, the aircraft faced opponents like the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, which combined superior speed, firepower, and ruggedness. Allied pilots, armed with new tactics and radar-directed interception, systematically dismantled the advantages the Zero had once enjoyed. Incremental upgrades could not overcome the fundamental limitations of the airframe, and Japan's inability to field sufficient replacements or adequately trained pilots accelerated the aircraft's decline. Despite this, the Zero's impact on aerial warfare was profound. Its early performance forced Allied engineers to accelerate the development of more capable carrier fighters and reshaped air combat doctrine, shifting focus from tight-turning dogfights to energy-based tactics and the prioritization of pilot protection and firepower. The aircraft's design and operational history provided enduring lessons about the trade-offs inherent in fighter development, lessons that influenced the design of subsequent generations of aircraft in both the propeller and jet eras. In the decades following the war, the Zero transitioned from a feared adversary to a symbol of technological ingenuity and historical reflection. Preserved examples in museums and private collections, along with a handful of restored airworthy aircraft, continue to showcase the Zero's distinctive profile and capabilities at commemorative events worldwide. Its continued presence in films, literature, and air shows ensures that it remains one of the most recognized aircraft of the Second World War. Ultimately, the Zero stands as both a triumph and a cautionary tale. It demonstrated how innovative engineering and focused design could deliver a world-class fighter capable of redefining naval aviation. But it also illustrated how quickly a revolutionary weapon can become obsolete when confronted by industrial might, tactical adaptation, and rapid technological progress. The Zero's story, from unrivaled dominance to desperate last stand, encapsulates the shifting dynamics of World War II aviation and secures its place as one of the most significant and studied fighters of the 20th century.